Hey, you all, welcome back. So I'm going to make a series of videos that are just talking through and giving you a taste of the kinds of things we might have done in class with each one of the readings I'm asking you to do. Now, these readings are important because they're giving you the tools or the theories or the concepts that I'm going to want you to use for this next project, which is going to last the remaining part of the semester. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, so wait, we just finished paper one and we're in the midst of writing paper two. Why are we starting on this sort of third project? Well, this is a recursive class in which you are revising paper one. You're nearing completion of that paper two, that comparison and interview that you did. And now we're starting a new thing. Had we been face to face, we would have been doing all kinds of interesting work with this notion of a discourse community. And that's what we're really going to do. I've given you a taste of it on the assignments page, but what this is your chance to do interesting primary and secondary research on some discourse community that you find interesting, where what you do is you analyze the kinds of writing and reading they do and reach conclusions about it. Now, there are several models I've provided to you as well. So let's start with the basics. Here we are on the tentative schedule page right here. And this is the thing that I asked you to read today. John Swales, The Concept of the Discourse Community, Some Personal Reflections. You see pretty quickly that this is a journal article, and I chose it for you because it's got several different kinds of things I think we can use in this project. Now, you might have found it a little bit difficult to use because of his hoity-toity kind of very formal and overly theoretical language, but I chose this one subtitled Some Recent Personal History because I thought it'd be a little further down on that scale. Now, what you see is that very early on, he establishes the definition of what he calls a discourse community. He says it's a group of people who share a set of discourses understood as basic values and assumptions and ways of communicating about their goals. Linguist John Swales defined discourse communities, that's him, as groups that have goals and purposes and use communication to achieve their goals. We see later on that he's playing with some of the early definitions that he himself established right here, where he says the defining characteristics of a discourse community would mean that they have a broadly agreed set of goals. That is, they share some purposes for being in a community together. If we decide we're going to elect someone mayor of Chico, we put a committee together and we very quickly establish a set of ways of talking to each other, but our purpose is still to elect that person mayor. Secondly, it has mechanisms of intercommunication. We might think about media here, the different kinds of media that different groups would use in order to communicate with each other. It uses participatory mechanisms to provide information and feedback. That is, not just sharing tidbits about the world, but actually using writing in order to accomplish things. Fourthly, utilizing and possessing one or more genres in order to do this work. Some specific lexis. Now, lexis means slang. It means terminology. It means particular language styles that would be featured in a discourse community. Then it finally has a threshold level of members with a suitable degree of content and what they're calling expertise. So why does this matter for us? Well, if you scroll down a little bit further, you see that there could be things in our world right now that would be called a discourse community. We imagine that maybe a soccer team is a discourse community. We imagine that maybe a sorority or a fraternity is a discourse community. It would be hard for me to see an entire university being a discourse community because so many of us are in different majors and have different minors and speak different languages according to disciplines that we're studying. Publix employees, Republican voters, college Democrats, maybe. Scholars in a particular subfield like mine, well, maybe. Occupants of a particular dorm, who knows? What I would have done in class is I would have asked you to play with some of these and maybe thought of some on your own and think about like maybe how each of the ones you chose met these criteria for a discourse community. All of this would be put toward us trying to figure out which discourse community we'd like to study. I'm going to ask you for that information in a week or two. And then we're going to spend the rest of the semester with you engaged in certain kinds of online research that'll help you learn about it. Now, some things off the top of my head. First off, let's just say people in your major are a discourse community. That would be a wonderful thing to study. You could email or you could Zoom with professors, with advanced students. You could reach out to people who've just graduated from Chico State and ask them about the transition to the world of work. You could again, build on the kinds of work that you've done with your paper too. But it could be also anything that you find interesting, and maybe it's the kind of thing that you want to study because you want to be a member of that group at some point. Again, college Republicans or college Democrats, you as freshmen aren't involved yet but would like to be in the future. There could be a particular other group like CLIC, the Community Legal Information Center, that you'd like to join, or any number of the environmental groups, the social justice groups, the civically minded groups that reach out to the community. Those groups, we could, I think, call them discourse communities and study the kinds of language that they use. So depending on how you go with this project, you could go different kinds of ways, and each would have different kinds of challenges and opportunities. If you work with a major or a discipline as a discourse community, then there's going to be a lot of publicly available information, and therefore you would be doing a lot of secondary research. But if you chose something that's local to Chico, you would have a lot of people you could talk to and to interview like you have been with this second paper. There might not be as much online material, that is secondary research you could do. It would have to be more primary research. So given this thing that's going on with the pandemic, it seems important that we make a choice that would fit our world the best, that would be easiest and also most meaningful for you to do. The only thing that I'll do to end this is that here is John Swales 25 years later saying, here's a changed world. The discourse community premise that he started with may need some tweaking because of several kinds of things. He says right here, for example, however, it's unclear whether in this era of cell phones, family dispersion, a fluid and uncertain job market for the young, the rise of international trade, and the decline of local crafts and industries, traditional speech communities continue to exist in meaningful numbers. A second, good Lord, people are texting me. I can't let that happen in the future. A second set of problems is that the concept of discourse community as originally conceived was overly static. So we can deal with this later, but I wanted to highlight them for you now because what we've got then is a situation in which he goes on to explain those terms in, this is my wife and my child texting about me. That's hilarious. Right here in more, I'm having trouble concentrating, detail. Again, broadly agreed set of goals, mechanisms of intercommunication, information and feedback, genres, some lexis, and he adds two more. And he adds two more down here. At some point, you become an expert in this discourse community and don't need to talk as much, what he calls silential relations, and horizons of expectation. That is how you can tell good work from bad. So all these kinds of things we can use as markers of what we would consider discourse communities. And in the next week and a half or so, as you're turning in paper 2, I'm going to want you to make a decision about which discourse community you would like to study. Final thing I'd say is, let's say for this project you can work in teams if you would like to, if you feel that it would be easier for you to work with a team than to work separately. I think that that will be fine. So we'll talk more. Thanks.